Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Buying rental properties with a partner can be a great way to build a rental portfolio. Dave, I wanted to bring you on the show today because you've got kind of a unique partnership. You teamed up with your siblings, with your brother and your sister, and together you started buying rental properties. Can you walk me through how this all started?
Yeah, so I was working in the property technology space for a handful of years and had a lot of great exposure to some very smart landlords and saw what they were doing and learned quite a bit from them, and decided, along with my brother and sister, that we wanted to buy our first property. And we figured what better way to do it than to kind of leverage each of our opportunity and house hack. So we decided to purchase our first property as a 203K that my brother lived in, and we rented out a couple other units in the property. And it was a great way to get our first, step through the door. And we've acquired a handful of properties since then.
On the podcast today, we're going to talk about the smart way that Dave and his partners are financing their rental portfolio. We'll talk about how they own properties, whether they use an LLC or whether they thought it was best to own the properties in their name. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages to having a partnership, and we'll get into that 203K loan that Dave mentioned, and we'll talk about how they were able to use that to buy their first property with a very small down payment. Joining us on the show today from Cincinnati is Dave Spooner. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Dave. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property, and when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Dave, let's start off talking about your portfolio. Can you tell me about your rentals?
Yeah, we've got 8 units. So it's not a huge portfolio. That's 3 separate buildings. It's, a couple of duplexes, triplexes. And they're all generally like Class A residential, so nicer, kind of higher end properties. All have been older buildings that were rehabbed. We've handled the rehab ourselves on 2 of them, and 1 we bought right after it had been rehabbed.
Now, were your brother and sister interested in rentals too, or because of your involvement, did you kind of talk them into it?
Little of both. I mean, I certainly dragged him along a bit. I'd say my sister was always intrigued by the idea. My brother, it was a little more foreign to him. He's an engineer. He's kind of a straight line thinker. So pulling him into something like that is always, its own interesting challenge. But he was excited once we kind of showed him things. So they were very interested. They were intrigued, but I definitely had to do a little bit of work. I had a lot more exposure to that world. Yeah. So they wanted to learn a lot about it before they were ready to take any step in that direction.
Are they hooked today?
Definitely.
Yeah,
I would say
that's
definitely.
Awesome.
Maybe more than I am.
So what's your long-term goal? Like, if you guys thought about like what you want to do, like, do you want to build a big portfolio and live off the cash flow someday? Or is there something else you're working towards?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost cliche, but it's cliched for a reason. I think we're all just looking for financial independence. We're all starting our families. So we want to have something to hand down to them. We want passive income so that we don't feel like, while we'll still be working jobs, we'll still be working with organizations. We want to have a little bit more flexibility in that and a little bit more choice in the matter. And having that financial independence and having that passive income can make such a huge difference in the direction that you choose to take your career and your life. And that's really what we're looking for.
So how do you guys have things set up? Like right now, when you make a profit, do you split it 3 ways, or are you putting that money back into building the portfolio?
We're still in growth mode, so every dollar goes back in for either the next property or fixing up or adding value to existing properties.
That makes sense. So how do you have everything set up? Do you have like an LLC, or are you buying the properties in your names?
It's a little of both. So we do have an LLC. Sometimes it's easier, depending on the deal, to just purchase the property in an individual's name. And again, because we have a few different people involved, it makes it a lot easier. So we will do that sometimes and then transfer it into the LLC, or we'll buy it with the LLC. It just depends.
Have you had any trouble with that? Because people are always afraid of the due on sale clause when you transfer from your name to the LLC. I've never actually heard of anyone getting called on that, but has that ever come up?
It's a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So as you referenced, so it's definitely one of those things that I think people should be cautious around. I would advise talking to your banker. Obviously they'll, or at least speak to some bankers that are familiar with the area that you're investing in. Your banker might be like, earmuffs, don't tell me this thing, I don't want to hear it. Right. It just depends. But off the record conversations, they'll often tell you straight, like, hey, we as a bank have no interest in a due on sale clause. It's a protection, but as long as you're not doing anything untoward here, there's no problem. Just kind of don't ask, don't tell type of situation. So I've heard that from many people. Technically, it's something you could get called out on, but if you do a little bit of digging, you can usually find what the real risk is there.
Now, what about the financing? Do you guys all apply together for the mortgage, or is there a easier way to do it?
No, well, the individual that purchases the property usually just handles the mortgage in their name, and then if possible, it gets transferred. But that just depends on what the bank will permit. Typically not. Typically the mortgage stays in their name, and then the LLC is actually the one paying it, though.
Okay, so when you guys buy the property, it's one person buying the property. It's not everybody. And then do you put the other people on the title then?
No, we transfer the title to the LLC.
Okay. All right. So the LLC has the title and the mortgage is in one person's name.
Usually.
Okay.
Yeah, not always, but usually. Yep.
Okay. Now, what do you see as the biggest advantage to buying with partners? I mean, obviously you need less money to put in, but is there anything else that really you see as an advantage to having partners?
There's tons of advantages. First of all, distribution of skill set and distribution of labor is huge, especially if you're buying and managing yourself. If you're rehabbing too, the work that needs to be done, it's great to have other committed partners that you can call on to, get things done in a hurry when needed. So that's really nice.
Yeah.
Certainly the capital is an advantage. Also, you can only take so many loans, so many mortgages out as an individual, right? So having more than one individual allows us to acquire more properties. If it was just me, for example, I may be capped. I'd really have to lean into the LLC. It makes more complex transactions. It could bar us from certain transactions. So having more individuals is helpful there. Finally, because of the way that we chose to grow our business leveraging a 203K, there are some exceptions. There's some ways you can play with this, but generally you just get one 203K loan. You're not supposed to reuse it really. So if we didn't have multiple people, if I was just purchasing as an individual, I could do a 203K on my first property, but after that, I'm really barred from that. So having multiple people also gives you access to certain financial products that are really advantageous when investing in real estate.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially with the loans that you figure you have 3 times as many loans as like a regular person, or if you did it, if you guys were all on the loans, you would really be doing yourself a disservice, I think. And, I think that also goes to like couples. When couples are buying a property. It's
a great point.
Yeah, I think it's much better to buy them individually.
Yeah, you really shouldn't, even if it's just your house. The mortgage, if you can manage it, don't bring more than one person in. Even if you're husband and wife, you can both be on the title, but only one of you should be on that mortgage. Mm-hmm. That opens the door for your ability to acquire future properties if you do want to pursue real estate investing. But even if you don't, honestly, adding more people just adds complexity from the underwriting standpoint. There's more things for them to check. There's more things for them to call out and say, hey, we need clarification here. If you have the finances to afford the property, if you're not going to be over leveraged from a banking and underwriting standpoint, there is no need whatsoever to add multiple people to a mortgage.
Yeah. So what about disadvantages? I mean, you're selling me here on the advantages, but is there any disadvantages to having partners?
Well, I mean, it's more opinions, right? So things can end up being slightly less unified than they would be if it's just me or just an individual making all those calls. I think that is both a disadvantage and an advantage. It's helpful to have multiple opinions, but sometimes we disagree. The nice thing is we're, family, and we get along well, and we also understand, the triviality of a fight, right? So we can argue over something. We can really, dig our heels in the ground and fight over it. But at the end of the day, we're totally fine. And, business is business, and it's a separate thing. And we're going to try to come to the right decision together. So I think more than anything, you have to have that trust. And if you don't, it can go really bad. So don't get into business with somebody that you don't have total trust with, that you don't feel that you are at least in the larger vision totally unified with. And as long as that's the case, as long as you find somebody that matches that criteria, there's very few, if any, disadvantages.
Now, I know, obviously with a brother and sister, I mean, you've got a strong relationship, but did you have any kind of written agreement or even talk through what happens if somebody wants out, they don't want to do this anymore, how you're going to deal with that?
Yeah, we have an operating agreement in place. It's fairly boilerplate, and we do have some defined processes around somebody wanting to get out. The other thing that you'll commonly have happen when you have multiple people investing is that everybody doesn't have the same liquidity at any given time, right? So maybe an opportunity has come up, but one person is more prepared to put money down than another person is. And that's very similar to if somebody wants to pull out or pull out some portion of the funds. So first of all, if somebody's trying to pull out some funds, the nice thing about real estate property is you do have opportunities to perhaps refinance, to pay somebody out, right? Or to take some of that equity off the table to allow people to walk away. But even when investing, if liquidity doesn't match, if people aren't putting in the same dollars, one thing that we've started doing to account for that is we will actually we want everybody to have the same equity in a property. It keeps things so much simpler. We also want to build each other up from a wealth standpoint, but we also want to be fair to one another. So if, let's say, for example, one person is putting 50 grand into a property and another person is putting 20 grand into a property, we would treat the 20 grand as the equity, and the 30 grand is actually a loan from the individual to the LLC, and it carries an interest rate. And that interest rate needs to be paid off, and there's typically a termination date on that loan. So it's a nice, easy, fair way for everybody to feel like they're getting a fair shake on that deal, but also keeping equity similar and not having one person, pay for everybody else's investments.
Yeah, I mean, that's so smart. I mean, because you think, I mean, you're doing this to build wealth. And it's not good if all of a sudden one person gets left behind because they have something else going on in their life. That's really smart. Now, talk to me about the 203K loan. So you mentioned that you've used that to buy a property. Can you talk me through, or I guess maybe tell us what that is and then how you used it?
Yeah, a 203K loan is just an incredibly advantageous way to acquire property and build a portfolio. A 203K loan, it's an FHA 203K loan. It's a loan that's basically backed by the federal government to encourage home ownership and real estate purchases. And really, to oversimplify this, basically when you go to buy a property, the bank is going to give you a mortgage for the real property, for the actual physical property. They're not going to give you a mortgage for what the property could be. Right? They don't say, hey, when you're done fixing this up, it's going to be worth $500,000. So we'll give you a loan for that amount. And in effect, that means that you don't have construction costs included in the loan that you get from the bank. Now, you can take separate construction loans, but those have their own constraints. They typically have higher interest rates. You usually have to pay more in points. There's all sorts of downsides to doing that. They're also harder to acquire. So to simplify it, the 203K wraps both together. With a 203K loan, you bring in a 203K certified inspector. They come through with you to the property and you say, hey, I want to fix this up. I want to put in new flooring. I want to do a new paint job. We're going to do new plumbing. Here's going to be the new HVAC plan, yada, 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 right? And they actually do say, hey, at the end of this is going to be worth $500,000. Therefore, we're going to give you a loan that'll cover both the purchase price and the construction. And we're highly confident that it's going to hit that appraisal at the end and you should be in good shape. And they actually bring in the appraisal up front to appraise the property prior to construction being finished. So that just means that you're getting both the property and the money to construct the property all at once, which is an incredibly advantageous thing to have. So what we did is we purchased a 3-unit that needed about $100,000 worth of work. So we bought this 3-unit, and my brother was the one that was purchasing it, and he went and lived in it at the end, was intended to from the beginning to live there. So he was able to get this 203K loan. He was able to use it to fix up the property. You have to hire a certified 203K contractor. There's a list of them that you can find. And it's also nice as a first foray into real estate investing because the 203K inspector really holds your hand throughout the process. They want to make sure from both a banking and a government perspective that what they're buying with that money, with that loan, is actually getting done properly. So they inspect all the work. They come through regularly and they look at the things that the contractor is doing and they say, is this a fair price and is this good quality work? So as somebody that, had exposure to the real estate space but didn't have a lot of construction exposure, it was incredibly helpful to have that person holding our hand through the process, showing us everything that we needed to know, making sure the contractor, and we had great contractors, we ended up loving them, but making sure that they were doing good work. It's just such a reassurance there. So it's incredibly advantageous from a financial standpoint, from a beginner standpoint, to make sure that you're setting yourself off on the right foot. So then at the end of it, we end up with this beautiful property, newly remodeled, 3-unit, rents great, in fantastic condition with a whole bunch of forced appreciation because we just remodeled it for, far less than we otherwise could have.
That is really good. So you only needed a 3.5% down payment.
That's right.
And all the rehab money, everything else like that was all in the loan. Exactly.
So if I remember correctly, it was something around, I think we purchased it for maybe $170,000, this property. Again, it needed about $100,000 worth of work. So the loan was for roughly $300,000 in total. We only had to put 3.5% down to cover that, as you said. So minimal amount on that to get all of that work completed. And at the end, when they did finally appraise it, once the work was completed, because they do a final appraisal, and we refinanced out of the 203K loan, they actually appraised the value of the property at $400,000. So we had immediately generated more than 20% equity, and we got off of the mortgage loan insurance that we were paying. So it actually lowered the amount that we were paying in our monthly mortgage at the end of the whole thing. So really, all around, it was a fantastic way to go.
And the 203K loan, just to make sure that this is only for owner-occupant properties. You couldn't do this on a straight rental, but you guys got around that because your brother was living at the property.
Exactly. You can apply a 203K loan up to a 4-unit dwelling. So you could, of course, buy it use it on a primary home, but you can do it for a duplex, a triplex, which is what we did, or even a quadplex.
So then as far as the cash flow goes, did your brother then pay rent to your LLC?
Yeah.
Okay.
He did. Yeah. Yeah. So the way we structured it was to dramatically lower his rent price to what it would be on the market. So rent on the market was anywhere from $1,100 to $1,200, and he paid us, I think it was $600 or $700 a month in rent. So he was still covering a small portion, but he got a really great deal on his rent. We still paid into the LLC for financial and tax purposes. And it worked out really nicely.
So then as far as using that equity, once you fix that property up, you've got a lot of equity in that property. Were you able to tap into that to continue to buy more properties?
We have not chosen to do that, but that is absolutely a route that you can do, which is another reason it's so advantageous. Because we've just taken the cash flow. That property does incredibly well. It rents really nicely. The mortgage is very, very manageable. So it's cash flowing well beyond even any target we would normally have when looking at a property. So we like that. We're happy with the cash. We let it accrue. We've got some outside money that we can pour in. And we can really only take one project at a time. Right. So from that standpoint, it works nicely. But you can definitely do that. And that's something people commonly do. And just another reason that 203K loans are so incredible. If you're going to create that forced appreciation, you're suddenly going to have access to even more capital for the next acquisition you might do.
Yeah. And that is just a great way to grow your portfolio. I mean, you've created all this equity. If you can tap into that, that's your down payment money to keep going.
Exactly.
So then for your next property, how did you buy that? So that first property you got in with a small down payment. How did you get into your next property?
Yeah. So the next property, so after the first one and after, as successful as the first one was, we were looking for, either another property we could do a 2 or 3K loan with, which, the contingency there was something that was a good opportunity for some not too substantial, but needed some rehab work in a location that one of us would be, reasonably happy living. We didn't quite find that right away, but we did find a property that was a little more run down in a neighborhood that has, lower rates, more like Class B, Class C style housing. But looked really good on paper. The finances looked great. So we jumped at it. We went for the property. We decided to try something different. The property performed really well from a financial standpoint. Ultimately, we decided to move off of that property. So we purchased it. We had it for a couple of years. And again, it did well financially, but it was just a needy property, right? The property always had little issues popping up, like plumbing issues or HVAC issues or, whatever it may be. So there were some challenges with it. It was across town. So we felt like we were constantly driving over to it and spending so much time working on this thing that we decided to move on from it. And actually, and we can get into this if you're interested, but we ended up doing a 1031 exchange off of that property to purchase the new property that we have now that we kind of swapped that one for.
Yeah. So tell me about that. I think that's a great way to go. So you created equity in that property and then
Yes.
you use that then to buy, it sounds like a better property.
Yeah. Well, in from a cash flow standpoint, it's not a better property. It's at best about the same. But what we like about it and something that we've realized about our investment strategy, when you're first getting started, you're like, okay, I'm just going to pursue cash flow, right? I'm going to buy any property that's going to cash flow well. But what we've learned, which may seem obvious to many others, is that your time is very much a resource,
Yep.
right? And if you want to continue to acquire properties, especially if you're going to self-manage them, which we're doing currently and we plan to do for the foreseeable future, you have to have the time to do it. And if you're spending all your time driving across town to fix a toilet that's leaking a little bit, then you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to focus on the next property, whether it's a rehab, whether it's, uncovering it, networking with people to find good deals, whatever it is, you're wasting all your time on, small things at this property. So we said, hey, cash flow is actually not the most important thing. It's very important. It has to be there, but we also need a property that's going to attract tenants that are easy to rent to and is in good condition so it doesn't need a ton of work, right? Or at least not a ton of work as a rental. It could need rehab work, but not a ton of work once it's rented. The property that we targeted was in a very nice neighborhood, had just been remodeled, beautifully done, really well done remodel on it. Far more expensive, but we had built up some equity, so we were able to pretty easily afford it with that, down payment and everything on the 1031 exchange, and barely needs any maintenance. It barely needs any effort on our end to keep that rented and keep those renters happy.
And then you've got one other property besides that?
Yeah, so after we got that one, we purchased another property that is really the biggest rehab that we have undertaken. So a property that needed to be gutted. Actually, when we initially purchased it, we thought that it didn't need a ton of work. We thought that it needed the floors to be redone. We were going to lay some tile down. We were going to rip out the cabinets and redo them and then put in some new appliances and stuff. Well, when we ripped up some of the floor to redo it, we found that the mechanicals were absolutely not done properly. It looks like I think it was a job that at some point a homeowner had done themselves, decades ago, right? And it was obvious that this thing needed a lot more work. So it's been a longer project than we had initially projected. But fortunately, it's a great location and, it's a great property that we're confident is going to rent well. And when it's finished, will be really a fantastic asset for us. So we're actually now making it nicer than we had originally intended because we were like, hey, if we're going to do it, might as well do it. So we can make this again more like Class A housing, really nice high-end stuff. So that's what we're doing currently.
How are you doing the managing? I mean, you've got 3 people involved. Like, how do you do that? How do you split the work?
But property management software is, I think, so necessary for the process. There's so many things that you can automate. Our rental collection is automated. if somebody's late, our late fees are automated. The notifications that go out to our renters are all automated. We can easily communicate from the app with them, so we don't have to all share separate phone numbers that they're all texting. It's all a unified place. It's messaging them every single time through chat or email, which is great. We screen through it, so it's really easy for us to get screening reports. We sign our documents digitally through the property management software. So I cannot recommend enough property management software. Even if you have just a single unit, it's going to make life so much easier. We have just 8. It makes our lives so much easier. We could not do it the way that we do it or grow, as quickly as plenty of people grow faster than us, but as quickly as we have, it would not have been possible without having property management software, good property management software in place.
And tell us the software that you're using.
Our software is Inago, and again, that's where I work. I'm one of the co-founders of Inago. That's how I got started in the prop tech space. So we use Inago for ours, and the nice thing is it's free, and it's not just free for me because I'm a co-founder. It's actually free for everyone to use. So it's nice. There's no cost whatsoever, so you don't have to worry about paying a big bill just to get the software in place, and it's got a lot of tools that make it much easier to manage your properties, manage your renters.
That software, again, is inago.com. If you want to check that out later on, I've got a link to it on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 467. If Dave inspired you and you're ready to buy your first rental property or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley Ridge. She's a nationwide lender, and she has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. If you want to find out more or you want to set up a time to talk to Chaley personally, you can track her down at ridgelendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. I'll be back with a new interview next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.